Thanks, guys, for coming out, and thanks for everyone who's listening online. My name's Joshua Thorpe. I'm the 3D lead at Territory Studio in London, helping to train and develop the team of designers there. I've spent probably the last 12 years using Cinema 4D and other 3D tools to create ads, title sequences, concept art, and visual effects. And this is Pamela.
Hi guys, I'm Pamela and I am a senior motion designer at Territory Studio. I've had the chance to work on a lot of really exciting projects over the years, but for the past year or so I've mostly been doing a lot of 3D design work for film and games.
So you may be familiar with Territory Studio, but Territory is a creative specialist, drawing on years of expertise for design for films, games, brands, and different experiences, and we use that expertise to create compelling, future-facing experiences. This drives our vision of imagining new worlds that bring stories to life and take audiences where they've never been before. But what really sets us apart is our hugely talented team that love the craft and have a passion for storytelling and design. Today we'll be demonstrating how we use the Maxon tools within the wider pipeline at Territory, layering and combining familiar tools to create complex structures and designs for a variety of different projects across brand, film, or television. As you can see, it's very common for these tools to be utilized at every step during the creative process, be it in Cinema 4D for modeling, animation, design, Redshift for rendering, or the Red Giant suite within After Effects for motion graphics or compositing. So I'm going to quickly play our show reel so that you can see all of this in action.
It's like staring at a burning sun. Got teeth like razor blades, and you know that we're out for blood. We're out for blood. Better run, better run. Here it comes, here it comes. Better run, when the wolves come out to play. Like a war machine that keeps turning. No mercy, no mercy. Better run, better run. Here it comes, here it comes. Better run, when the wolves come out to play.
Thank you very much. Hugely talented team behind all of those projects, and in a lot of cases, Cinema 4D, Redshift, and a lot of other tools from Maxon are heavily used. So let's get into it. Today, we'll both be talking about using very familiar tools that come with Maxon and layering them up to create complex structures and designs. What I love about the Cinema 4D community and the wider 3D community is the open sharing of tips and tricks and knowledge that help us all to work more efficiently and more creatively. There's always 100 different ways to come at a project, and every artist will come at it from a different angle. Events like this are a great opportunity to peek behind the curtain and see how people work, and often with tools like Cinema 4D, just how simple it can be and how you can achieve very similar results for yourself. So though you may be familiar with a lot of the tools or the techniques that we're using here today, hopefully you will learn something new and something that you can implement into your own work and pipelines. So today I'll be breaking down a technique that we used for the launch film for Nike's digital platform, .swoosh. We knew that a key part of the brand was this dot. Just a dot, a simple dot that differentiates this new brand from the wider Nike brand. And we knew that that was a key part of the brief. So after exploring a few different options, the brief was to create a world that felt very digital, but still heroed the shoes that Nike are famous for. So after exploring a few different executions, I eventually landed on quad trees. Quad trees are a type of grid-like data structure where each node has 4 children, and each of those has 4 children, and so on until you reach the desired level of detail. It's a technique that's often used in 2D image compression, and it inherently has quite a digital look and feel already. Technically, in our case, we were going to be using oct trees, where each node has 8 children and they're laid out in a 3D grid. And you get this kind of voxel-like effect. So let's have a quick look at how we put this to use in the launch teaser for .swoosh. So as you can see, we created a large oct-tree structure that housed thousands of shoes and Easter eggs. And we had this rapid journey through the .swoosh world. This oct-tree was probably only a couple of subdivision levels deep to keep the consistency size of the shoes and really keep them heroed. And eventually we land in this gamified world that's decorated with more oct-tree-like structures. So I'll briefly explain the fundamentals by creating some interesting 2D examples, and then we'll just see just how far we can push this in 3D. And then hopefully by the end, we'll have a decent understanding of how you can create something like this, which is very similar to the .swoosh world, but we went on a larger scale with the .swoosh world. But you can see how you can quickly use the oct-tree as a base structure, layering up glass and neon and metal connectors to create something that has quite a lot of complexity by the end. Okay, so let's jump into Cinema 4D. So like I said, we're going to start off with some 2D examples. So I'm going to start off with the most simple of it all, and start with a plane. We'll start by reducing the size of it and reducing the segments to 1. Now what I'm going to do at the start is I'm going to add this into an instance. And the reason for doing this is so that later on it's easier to update the shape and update the objects that we're using. So I'm going to put that instance that we've made into another instance and just put these into a folder to keep things organized. And I know Robert was mentioning staying organized. This is a helpful tip to help you stay organized. You can change the icon of anything in C4D. So what I like to do is create nulls and then change the icon to a folder just to help me know that there's other stuff in there. So you can come down here into the basic tab and it's hidden under this little icon twirl down. And you can just load these different presets in here. Lots of different icons, very helpful for rigging, or like I like to do, keep organized, and you can change it to any color there as well. So back to it. I'm going to put that second instance into a cloner. You can just press Alt and click on the cloner, and it will automatically make that instance a child of that. And I'll stick with a 3x3 grid, but obviously we want to make the grid spacing the same size as our instance. Now, like I said, we've got these nodes, if you like, or these planes, but we want to divide them in half. So how I'll do that by creating another cloner that's just 2x2 this time. And because we're getting incrementally more detailed, we actually need to make the spacing of this one half as much as before. So the last one was 20, this one will be 10. I want that to be 2. And I'll also halve the transform of this one as well. Whoops. And then I'll put that cloner inside the other cloner. Now, there's a bit of funny business there. They've disappeared. So what we need to make sure we're doing is copying that instance into the new cloner as well. Sorry about that. There we go. So now we can see straight away we're getting that kind of subdivision look. And you can, like I said, you can increase the detail by just layering that up. So I can copy that cloner again inside itself, and again, and you slowly get more and more detail. Now, right now, it's just iterating between the clones, so you're getting this very repetitive structure. How do we have control over how these are distributed? So the best way to do this is with effectors. So I'm going to use a plane effector, and I'm going to make sure that it's being applied to all of my clones. Just come over here to the effector tab and drag that into there. Now, by default, a plane effector shifts the position. We want to turn that off. And we're not going to affect rotational scale either. We want to actually affect which clone is being shown. So to do that, we can come down to modify clone and just drag that up to 100. And now we've gone back to the lowest level of subdivisions. And then to control which is being shown, we can just use fields. So that could just be a simple random field. And as you can see, we can go through the different seeds, and you're getting different patterns. You can even animate this and have that playing. And it's already look quite an interesting look that we're getting there. But one of my favorite things to do is control this with an image. And so we know exactly what it's going to look like, and we have loads of control over that. So I'll create a new standard material. And I've got an image that I know I want to use here, which is this kind of wavy gradient. And I'll apply that to the cloner. Now, by default, it just applies the texture once to every single clone. That's not what we want to do. We want it to go over the whole image. So we need to change the projection in the settings to flat. Now, right now, it's looking in the wrong direction. So you can come up to the top here and change this to texture transform. I'm going to rotate it just 90 degrees. Whoops, daisy. Just 90 degrees so it's facing down. And then another handy trick here is you can right-click on your texture and fit it to object. Yes, we want to include the children, and it fits it perfectly to that object. Now, in the plane, we no longer want the random field. We want to control it with our material that we've just applied. So we can use the shader field and change this from custom to color, and it will use the color that we applied into the material tag, which we can just drag into there. And you can see already we're getting something, but it's probably not quite what we're after. Another thing that I want to change here is I want the color to be applied. I want one color to be applied per clone rather than the image to be applied over the whole thing. So what I'll do is come to the material. I'll just add a selection into here. We don't have any selections, so that will turn it off. And then we'll come up to the shader and then just force this to update by switching this to color and then no color, and then we'll get the color showing up that way. Now, say we want to control how this is being distributed. It's still not quite how we want it. So we can come down into the shader field and go down to remapping. And then there's this handy contour option at the bottom where you can add a quadratic effector, which you can just slide, which is kind of like a curve, or you can actually add a custom curve as well. And you can see here we're getting a better distribution of those clones that match more evenly up with the image that we have added there. Now, if you're still not happy with that, say you want to see more of this kind of like second level of subdivision, you want to see more of those, you can actually just go into the cloner and copy that again, so you get more of those showing up. So it's kind of favoring that size of the instance instead. Now, like I said, there's no reason this has to be a square, and we set it up in such a way at the beginning that it's very easy to swap that out. So I'm going to come and add a disk, make that a little bit smaller to match the size of our scene. drag that into the instances. And then I'll go to that first instance that we created, drag our disk to replace the plane, and straight away you can see that it's updated that, and I'll just turn the lines off, increase the subdivisions. And you can see now instead of a more digital look, we're getting a bit more of an analog look, kind of like a halftone look. And you could push this as far as you wanted to. There's no reason this has to be this size. It can be any size. You can limit it to different shapes with effectors in similar ways. This could even be 3D objects as well. So let's just quickly grab a cube, make it a similar size, maybe add a fillet on there. And in the same way, we can just drag that into our first instance. And now we've got 3D objects in there. It's very easy to just use this as like a base framework to get some interesting results straight away. So talking of 3D objects, let's see how now we can turn this into an octree by using it in a 3D laid out grid. So in the same way, we're going to add a basic object. In this case, it will be a cube because we want to go into the 3D space this time. Same as before, we'll add a couple of instances of that and just tidy things up here a little bit. Put that into a cloner. And this time we'll just do a 2x2. Again, we want it to be the same size. Make sure we're going up as well. We want it to be the same size as our cube. And then I'll just bring this up in the Y so that it's sitting on our floor. Now, as before, we want to create a copy of that clone inside itself. Now, we just need to make a few adjustments here. We need to come over to transform, halve the size of our clones. And then we also need to halve the distance between our clones. And then we're getting that kind of voxel-like look. And again, it's very easy to iterate on top of that just by creating more copies of that clone inside itself. So you can go as far as you're willing to risk. So I'll just leave it a couple of levels there. Now this is already fairly interesting. We could add a fillet onto our cube, and we've got a reasonably interesting structure here. I might want to add another plane effector to get a bit more randomness into this. So add a plane effector, turn off position, change it to modify clone, and then add a random field into there. And then I can just play with that until I'm happy. But let's say we want to just branch out, so we're not just using basic geometry. We want to use some of our own custom geometry. Maybe we want to use a few different shapes. So that's very easy to do as well. I just happen to have made a few shapes earlier on, and I've made sure that these all kind of are fit within the same size as my cube, so they're only 100 by 100, but this could be any shape you wanted to. And I'll just copy them back over to here. So what we want to do to be able to use these inside of our octree is put them all into a cloner. Now, what we're going to do is reduce this to 1 by 1, because we're not actually interested in using this to display. We're going to use this to drive iterating between the different shapes. So I'll drag this cloner into the instances, and I'll replace the cube inside our instance object with our cloner. Now, by default, it's just going to show one of them. So how do we control which object is being shown? We can come, again, using our trusty plane effector, making sure that it's being applied to our new cloner. We can use that. Again, turn off position. We want to be affecting which clone is being shown. Now, again, it's just a switch between them all, but we can use fields. Let's, in this case, use a shader field with some noise. I'll come in here and add a bit of contrast. Oh yeah, I need to make sure that it's being applied world. And there we go. Now we're getting some iterations between the different shapes. And again, you can play with the noise any way you would normally. So you play with the seed until you're happy with the distribution of them. Coming down again to this one, that's affecting the subdivision layer. You can tweak that to your heart's content. But right now, let's try and get some more variety in there. At the moment, they're all facing in the same direction. I'm just going to tidy things up here a little bit. So this first plane effector is random shape. I'm going to add another plane effector. I love it. My favorite effector. Turn off position. And I'm going to change the name of this one to random rotation. Make sure it's being applied. Yes, it is. Now, yeah, so we want to check on rotation. Just add a full turn into a couple of these. Now, by default, because we're doing a full turn, nothing shows up here. We need to control this with fields. So again, we can just bring in a random field. Now, that's definitely not what we want. We want to come into our remapping node and make sure that this is being quantized or stepped in 90-degree increments. So let's do that by coming to the step effector, adding 4 levels, because obviously there's just like the 490 degrees within our 360, and already we're getting some really nice variation of angle. The next thing I want to do is, I'm a bit fed up of looking at white, plain geometry. Let's add some color into here. Again, let's just add a plane effector to our cloner. This one will be random color. Come to the parameters, turn off position. Now all we need to make sure that we're doing here is making sure that fields color is being applied. We can just come over to the fields. Again, we can do random. Come over to the color remap, and we can just add a gradient into here. By default, this will just be black to white. But again, coming down to our presets, some really handy presets for gradients inside of Cinema 4D. We can just come and select one of these ones down here, maybe that one, or this one's quite nice. And we can remap this further to get, maybe we want to see more of that darker pink color. So I'll just come into here. Oh, that's the wrong way. So there we go. And you can change this further as well. There's more layers that we can add on top of this. Maybe we don't want it to be a solid block of geometry. Maybe we want to carve out some of these so we can only show a few of them. We can do that again using our trusty plane effector. Turning off position. This time coming down to visibility. And we also want to make sure that it's not overriding the color that we've just added, so we can turn that off. So I've got the visibility check down here, and this time I'm going to add a linear field, and just turn it around, lift it up a little bit, and there you go. You can start to see how you can really art direct this. And again, there's no reason we need to use just one field. We can start to layer up fields as well if we want to. Maybe we want to add a random on here, and we can overlay that on top. And we can see straight away it's very easy to art direct this and get a lot of sort of randomness and variety into there. The final thing I want to show you is the example that I showed you at the beginning. So this is built in the exact same way as before. So I'll just turn these things off, turn that off, and I'll just solo our base layer. You can see it's using the exact same base structure that we used in the previous example, but this time I don't want to use these shapes directly. I want to clone other objects onto this structure. So this is just like a base structure that I'm going to use to clone other things onto. So to do that, I need to put it into a connect object, and that makes Cinema 4D think of this as a mesh rather than lots of different objects. Now C4D thinks of this as a mesh, and you can access all of those edges and points and faces to clone onto. Another side thing that this helps with is it welds the points that are directly on top of each other. So when we are cloning onto the points, we're not getting duplicate objects that are directly on top of each other. So I'm going to just briefly go through this. I won't go through this in a lot of detail because Pam's got some awesome stuff to show us as well. I'll just briefly go over how I layered this up. So the first thing I did was I just grabbed one single spline and I cloned that to all of our edges. And then in the cloner options, I just made sure that it was scaled along the edge so that it was the exact same size as each edge that we're cloning onto. And I'm using the extremely powerful Redshift object tag to render all of these splines as cylinders. And now I've got some really nice glass cylinders. And then I did that again, but this time I want to use this as neon tubes that are inside those glass cylinders. So one interesting thing that I did here was I used a shader effector to drive how and where my illumination is. You can see in those examples here, I was containing the neon tubes to just a few different places along the neon tubes, and then I can help guide the viewer's eye as we go through this journey by moving where the neon is being emitted from. So I just did that with a light, with a shader effector that was just a solid color. So this could be, again, anything you want to. And then I'm controlling that with a box that can be moved around. So let's just add a vibrate tag onto here so you can see it moving a little bit. And you can see how that starts to move around. And then you can plug that into your shader graph just using the very powerful color user data node. So you can come over to here, and then in your attributes, down in the attribute name, there's a bunch of presets here, so you can grab the MoGraph color, and you can pull that in to drive your emission color. And then I've also plugged it into a ramp node, crushed that down quite a lot, plug that into the opacity, so we're only seeing those neon tubes exactly where we want to be seeing them. And then I just kind of added some of these extra little details, like the little connectors, and some nice wavy glass to be on trend. And so hopefully you get the idea. It's very easy to layer all of these things on top of each other and create something that has a lot of detail, enough to really stand up and be right inside the structure, like we used in the dot swoosh example. And hopefully you can even combine a bunch of these other things that we've used as well, like the random shapes, random direction, and hopefully, yeah, you've got a decent understanding now of how you can maybe utilize this in some of your own work. I'm now going to hand over to Pam, who's got some awesome stuff to show us as well.
Thank you. Okay, so similar to Josh, I'm going to be showing you guys how we use Maxon tools in our workflow. I'm going to be focusing on some techniques I've used recently to create holographic objects. And we're going to be focusing on making really simple builds, but layering up so that they look more complex than they actually are. So it's no secret that Territory loves a hologram. Envisioning futuristic technology is our bread and butter, but what's really at the core of everything we do is world building, and that's across brand, film, games, experiential, creative advertising. We're always asking ourselves, how is this fitting into the story? Are we hitting the story beats? Does this hologram feel like it fits in the universe or the era in which it lives in, basically? So I'm going to be kind of showing you a bit of a similar process to stuff like this. So this is what we're going to be making, and here are some variations of it. So this workflow is really good for kind of giving yourself a lot of options, layering stuff up in different ways, having a lot of scope to present to a client. So the first, I'm going to break it into 3 parts. So the first thing I'm going to talk about today is the materials. It's really good to have a material library of sorts. It's kind of like a colour palette, creating that level of consistency. A lot of the times as well, we have to apply the same holographic treatment to multiple objects in a film or a game, or we need to kind of swap objects in and out. So it's good to kind of create something that makes it easy for you to iterate. So we have a Fresnel layer here, which creates a really nice like kind of halo effect around objects. We've got a subsurface, which depending on how you kind of look at it, you're kind of cheating that level of translucency. And then we've got two glass-like materials, one that's a little more rough. Glass is really good for holograms, so is metal, because this tends to be the materials that we associate with expensive technology. And holograms are usually used, well, at the moment anyway, to illustrate a world that is a lot more technologically advanced than we are today. The second thing I'm going to talk to you about today is the geometry aspect. So we're just going to be using spheres and a cheeky torus. And the effect is literally just using the poly effects deformer and then different random or plane effectors to kind of disrupt the way it looks. And they're all built up using a similar sort of way. We're just changing values up and down. And then the final thing I'm going to show, if I've got time, is the After Effects comp, where we're using lots of Red Giant plugins to kind of boost things that extra level quicker. So we've got our 4 material setups here, so I'm just going to very quickly kind of pop up the graph of them. Going to get my Redshift render view and fling that over there. So our Fresnel, and I've got 2 lighting setups here. They're both just HDRI dome lights. The first one is this studio one, which I'm pretty sure I got from Grayscale Gorilla, that I've just tinted purple and upped the exposure. And then the second one, which I'm using in the subsurface, actually in combination, is this Chapel one, which I think I got from Polyhaven. So just very simple setup. So for our Fresnel, I have just used a standard material, literally just switched off the reflectance, and in this texture bit you can just come down here and drop Fresnel, and that's it. You can dial this up and down if you want to kind of create like a harsher edge, almost like a kind of sketch and tone effect, but I really like the kind of soft glow this kind of gives. So that's our Fresnel. For our subsurface, shove that light back on. Again, very, very simple. So all we've done to create this is drop our diffuse weight down to 0. We've applied a bit of roughness and dropped the weight down on the reflection. We've added a smidge of sheen roughness. I think the default for that's 0.3, so we've just bumped it up a wee tiny bit. And then we've added some weight to the transmission as well to kind of create that translucency. But the real power comes from subsurface. So if you kind of, I realise I'm covering this, if you kind of dial this up and down, you get different sort of levels. And I like to kind of put like a light colour up at the top and then a dark colour for the scatter, just to kind of create that sort of gradient look. And I will quickly show you the glass ones. So I've just called this one first. Just called this one water to kind of differentiate between the two. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a displacer on this because the real power from it comes from the refraction. So, drop that in. And we're just going to chuck a wee noise. And we're going to ramp this up. Oh. We're going to ramp it up more. Yeah, so once we do that, you can see kind of all this like nice colourful light we've got going on around the edges. And once we kind of do the poly effects and break everything up into geometry, we'll get these nice like glints of colour throughout. And yeah, so the last one, really similar settings. This has just got a little bit more roughness than the one before. And I'm actually using this thin film shader from this artist here. It's a really, really powerful script. There's a really good tutorial on it. But I'm going to just quickly show you how with the new cinema you can create something similar like in the software. So I'll come over there. So move this guy over here. So if we create a Redshift standard material, If we now scrub all the way down here, we've now got a thin film added. So if I chuck that in there, and do really similar settings to what's on the other one. Oh, is that better? Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, so now if we make this a bit smaller so that we can see what's going on. If we, in this thin film, we also want to put this at 1.33 because that's the refraction index of water. So now if we push up this thickness and also push up this metalness, we'll get a really similar effect where you can see all the colour kind of coming through. So that is our materials. I'm just going to go into our poly effects. Okay, so we have the Fresnel set up from before, and we're just going to start with that. And I'm just going to come up to MoGraph here and add a poly effects deformer. So if we drop that into our sphere, can't really see what it's doing just now, but if we come into our scale and we drop this down, doesn't seem to be doing anything. Yeah, if I take this down, my segment's down, yeah. You can see that it's breaking up the geo into polygons non-destructively. And what we can do is, if we pop this back up, we can use a random effector to displace it. So you can see how it sort of just bursts it out. So if we change the random mode here to something like turbulence, and we bring down our strength, we start to kind of get this sort of wavy look. And then if we play about with the parameters here, so if I just add a bit of rotation, and if I add a bit of scale as well, we start to get some really cool effects. Another trick that I love to do with stuff like this is if we add a subdivision, and we drop our sphere into that, it changes the squares to little circles. So now if we bump back up our segments, we've got this really sort of organic looking holosphere broken up by dots. So I'm just going to duplicate this and show you kind of how to do some variations. So for tidiness, I'm not the most tidy, if I'm honest. So if we take the sphere out of the subdivision surface and we swap it out for a torus, I'm just going to show you some other things. So I'm just switching this around. I'm dragging the material up to it. I'm going to turn these guys off, and I'm going to put the poly effects back up here. So if I take the radius down to 80 and the other radius down to 24, turn this back on, we start to see this breaking up like this. And we want to put our segments up too. And again, it's just a case of like playing with different settings. So in the effector, I'm going to bump the strength off of this to 100. And then I'm just going to kind of play about with these settings to get something working. 0, it's to 30. And I'm going to put some rotation down here too. And we don't want any scale. So now that doesn't look too exciting, but if we use the kind of materials that we created earlier and try out some of those, we can get loads of different looks. So I'm just going to pop a glass on here, and I'm also going to swap out our lighting for the other one. And we've got this really cool, like, chromatic sort of look, which is really fun. And the next thing I'm going to show you is how to kind of maximize on these renders. So what I'm going to do is add some AOVs in. So I've already got some added here. These are the kind of core ones I like to use: beauty, reflection, refraction, specular lighting. And if we come back here, it gives us these options to swap them out, and we get loads of really different looks. So this kind of just maximizes your kind of comp options. So that's kind of changing the look of things. Just show it on the other one. Yeah. So I'm going to just quickly jump into After Effects and show you the stack now of how that would work. So we've got our variations all here, so I'm going to jump into a couple, hopefully, and kind of explain the setup for that. So if I solo these guys. So with that AOV setup, it gives you the ability, if you're exporting as OpenEXR, to extract different passes. So I really like to kind of play about with like using different ones. So for this pass, I've just extracted the beauty. I've tinted it to white, and I've dropped the opacity to 50%. I've then pulled in another one, and this time extracted the refractions, tinted it white, and added an optical glow, which I love, and dropped the opacity down to 20% as well, just to make everything a bit softer. I then have a third pass. This time I've extracted the specular lighting from it. Again, tint and an optical glow. This one I've kept at 100%. And then I've reused one of the passes from earlier, except I've tinted it and also added this light burst effect, which is really cool for creating that sort of glowing from the bottom look. So... And then these guys are all just screened on top of each other to create this sort of more detailed looking sphere. And then my favourite part is the adjustment layers with all the effects. So I'm just going to run you through those. So I've got a shine, and I've just put a mask around the top so it's only the bottom that's being shined. I then have a directional blur just to sort of create that sort of warpy panelled light sort of effect. I've then got another tint. I've just dropped it to 50% so that it's mostly desaturated, but we've got that little bit of chromatic colour. We then have a fastbox blur. Again, we've just masked around the top so that you've got that sort of halo effect around the sides. Then use one of my other favourite effects, which is point zoom. This is a really quick way to kind of create that conical projection look, especially if you're trying to concept a hologram really quickly, and you can use this sort of crosshair to choose where your projections come from. We then have a couple of looks. I've got a more blue one here, and I've got a green one that's dropped to 50%, just to kind of create a sort of cyan-y feel. Most of the time I use presets and then kind of tweak various aspects, but it's a really powerful tool just to kind of take your work here to here very quickly. I then have chromatic aberration, just very subtle. It's very easy to go over the top with that sort of thing, but a little bit kind of helps just make it that a bit softer. And then lastly, we have an unsharp mask and a noise just to sort of kind of create that kind of cinematic effect. And the other ones are all built in a very similar way, either just by mixing and matching the different passes, kind of changing the colours, extracting different layers. So yeah, Maxon tools make it really easy for us to kind of create variations very quickly. If I tab back to the presentation, this is just quickly another example of the same process used on another object. So we've got a poly effects pass going on here. We've got glass kind of creating the edge, and we've got some Fresnel. We've got some noise. So it's kind of easy to apply it to different things. And that is it for us. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much to Maxon for inviting us. It's been great to be here.